Now comes balancing the ledger accounts. We know very well that ledger accounts, which are in fact the summaries of all related journal entries in the journal for one accounting head, these summaries will not be of any benefit if we do not get end of the reporting period balance out of it. So balancing is very important component of this posting process. So we have to learn that how to do balancing over ledger account. So what do? We will take the same practice question through which we learned the posting process. Okay. So in that we will see that what are the final balances of each ledger account. So final balances we will extract from each ledger account that we have already prepared in our previous module. So balancing is an amount that in fact equalizes both sides of the ledger account. So we can observe the total of this sample account is 15,000 under the both sides. But remember that the postings appearing in black color in the left hand side are equal to 15,000, but in the right hand side or credit side it is not 15,000, it is in fact 9,000. So the amount which is balancing these two sides is 6,000. You can say that total debit is rupees 15,000 and total credit is rupees 19,000. So subtracting credit from the debit, we get 6,000. So this 6,000 is in fact the balance of this sample ledger account. Here the important thing to learn is that how to identify the balance. So the balance that would be appearing in the credit side of a ledger account would be known as debit balance. And the balance which would be appearing in the debit side of the ledger account would be known as credit balance. Okay. We will learn it through a practice which will concrete our knowledge on this debit and credit balances. Okay. Let's move forward. And this is the bank account that in fact we prepared in our previous practice question, where if you see that the debit side was giving us 220,000 and credit side was giving us a total of 149,500. So simply deduct this 149,500 from 220,000, we shall get the balance of rupees 70,500. Well, this balance of 70,500 would be appearing in the credit side. You can see total of debit side is 220. And when you will make total of this credit side, that would be 149,500. And this is 220. So this 220 minus 149,500 will give us a balance which is 70,500. So this 70,500, since it is appearing in the credit side of the ledger account of bank, So it would be known as the debit balance. So the mechanism of balancing a ledger account includes, number one, identify natural side of the accounting head. For a bank, you know that bank is an asset, and the nature of asset is debit. When I'm saying natural side means the debit side for assets and expenses, and credit side for capital, liabilities and income. So number one step is that we have to identify the natural side. So the natural side in this bank account is debit. Then make total of the natural side, which would always be the bigger, the heavier one. So make total of the natural side first. In this example of bank account, the debit side total is heavier than the total of the credit side, since debit side is its natural side. Okay, and then place this sum at the bottom of both sides. You observe this thing that we place 220,000 under the debit side as well as under the credit side of that bank account. And then deduct one by one all items appearing in the lower side from the total. This is one way to do this practice, or otherwise you can make total of the lower side altogether, as we did in this example, and then the total would be subtracted from the total of the heavier side. So there are two ways to go for it. One is write total sum of the heavier side in your calculator, which is in fact the total of the natural side, and subtract the lower side one by one, each item. Or make total of the lower side separately, and then subtract the total of the lower side from the total of the natural side, that is in fact the heavier side. So we shall get a balance. Okay? And place the balancing figure in the lower side. We have observed this in that bank account example, that the balance was placed in the credit side. Credit side of that bank account was in fact the lower side. But remember one very important thing over here. Since the balance is appearing in the credit side, it is because of the debit side was heavier. Therefore, this balance will be named as debit balance, because debit was heavier than the credit. So the balancing figure is in fact reflecting the heavier side's nature. So it would be named as debit balance, the balance which will appear in the credit side. Okay? Well, here one very important concept should be learned, and that is the concept of contra accounts. Because there are few contra accounts for which there is an exception to the heavier side. Contra means which cancels the effect. In our previous learning, we have seen certain contra accounts like drawing. Drawing is contra to capital and member of owner's equity. If we are saying that drawing is a member of owner's equity and the nature of owner's equity is credit, therefore the credit side of drawing account should be totaled at priority. This should be a wrong concept. Why? Because drawing always behaves contra to capital. Therefore, the accounting heads which are contra in nature, their opposite side would be giving us heavy total. For example, drawings, which is contra to capital, although it's member of owner's equity and the nature of owner's equity is credit, but for drawings, the debit side would always be heavier. Purchases return. It is contra to purchases. Purchases is member of expense main head and the nature of expense is debit. But since purchases return is contra to purchases, therefore credit side of purchases return would always be heavier and should be totaled first. Sales return. Let's take example of sales return. Sales return is contra to sales. It is always subtracted from sales. It behaves opposite to sales. Sales being member of income, which is in its nature credit. So sales having credit nature and sales return contra to sales, therefore the sales return would always be taken as debit. So the debit side of sales return would always be heavier because sales return is also a contra nature of account. Let's see, there are few contra accounts which behave opposite to their original accounts. Like I have discussed, purchases return. It is contra to purchases, belongs to expense main head. Sales return, contra to sales, belongs to income. Drawings, contra to capital, belongs to owner's equity. Provision for depreciation, contra to fixed asset, belongs to assets. And provision for doubtful debts, contra to debtors, asset. Remember, these two we will be discussing in our later, that the modules that we will be discussing subsequently, like in our later stage. Okay. So balance of contra account is always opposite to the balance of its original account. So the important tips to remember over here, that balance appearing in the credit side is debit balance and the balance appearing in the debit side is credit balance. Balance reflects the nature of accounting head in terms of debit and credit. Whatever the nature of the accounting head would be, the balance would exactly be the same. Thank you very much.